Hey guys, so today we are going to discuss top 25 plus interview questions of JavaScript, and these are the questions that are going to help you in your recent interview, and these are the only questions that you need to look at before your interview. So let's get started. So our first question is, can you differentiate between null and undefined? So in JavaScript, null means a variable that has no value intentionally set to it, so it's empty by choice. And undefined means a variable that has been declared but not assigned any value yet. So basically it's empty because it has not been set up. Both represent absence of value but in slightly different ways. So let's move to another question. So our next question is, what are JavaScript data types? So JavaScript data types are the kind of values that we can work with in JavaScript. So there are mainly two types, primitives and objectives. Primitive types includes undefined, nulls, booleans, numbers, strings, symbols, and big int, and everything else like arrays and functions falls under the object type. So these types help us to organize and manage our data in different ways. So let's move to the different question. How do you convert a string to a number in JavaScript? So to convert a string to a number in JavaScript, we can use the parseInt functions for a whole number and parseFloat functions for number with decimals. Another quick way is to put a plus sign before the string, just like this, which changes the string 123 into the number 123. So let's move to the different questions. Explain how these keywords works in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, these keywords refer to the object that is currently being used, so its value changes depending on whether and how it's used. For example, in a method, this points to the object that the methods belongs to, so it helps make functions flexible by referring to their current object. Now let's move to the different question. How does this behaves in arrow functions as compared to the regular function? So in regular functions, this can be changed based on how the function is called. So in arrow functions, this is fixed and always refer to the object that was in scopes and when the arrow functions was created. So this makes arrow functions predictable when using inside them. Now let's move to the different question. Can you change the context of these keywords in a functions? If yes, how? So yes, we can change the context of this in a function. So we can use the methods like call methods, apply methods, or bind method. So call and apply changes this for just one function call, while bind creates a new functions with a permanently changed this. So these tools helps control what's this referred to. Now let's move to the different question. What are closures in JavaScript? So closures in JavaScript let a functions remember and access variable from an outer functions even after the outer function has finished running. So this means that we can keep using the outer functions variable in inner functions as well. So it's like the inner functions keeps a memory of its environment. Now let's move to the different question. Can you provide a practical use case for the closure? A practical use case of a closure is creating a private variables. For example, we can make a functions that manage a counter which only that the functions can change or access. So each time we call the functions, it can increase the counter without letting anything outside the functions that change its directly. Now let's move to the different question. How do closures affect the memory management? So closures can affect the memory by holding onto variables longer than accepted, which prevents them from being cleaned up by the garbage collection. So this can lead to increased memory usage if not managed carefully. So it's like keeping the lights on in a room while we are not using, which wastes energy as well. So let's move to the different question. Describe event bubbling and event capturing. Event bubbling and event capturing are two ways events move through a web page in a JavaScript. So in event bubbling, an event starts at the target element and moves outward to its parents. In event capturing, it starts from the outermost element and move inward to the target. This determines the order of event handling. Now move to the different question. What is the default behavior of most events bubbling or capturing? The default behavior for most event in JavaScript is bubbling. This means when an event happens, it first triggers on the target element, then moves to its parent element one by one. This helps in managing how events are handled on a page more efficiently. Now move to the different question. How can you stop an event from bubbling up or capturing down? To stop an event from bubbling up or capturing down in JavaScript, we can use the method called event.stopPropagation method, which when we call this in an event handler, it prevents the event from moving beyond the current element. This means that only the current element will handle the event and no others. Now move to the different question. How do you handle asynchronous operation in JavaScript? To handle the asynchronous operation in JavaScript, we can use the callbacks, promises, or async await. Callbacks are functions that we can run after the task finishes, and prompt lets us to handle future results on error, and async await makes our code look synchronous. While handling asynchronous tasks, it will make it easier to read and manage. The different question. What are the promises and how do they work? Promises in JavaScript are the tools for handling asynchronous operation. They represent a value that might be available now, later, or never. A promise can be in one of the three states, which is pending, fulfilled, or rejected. We can use .then method for success and .catch method for errors and .finally method for any cleanup after operation. Now let's move to the different question. Can you explain the async await syntax and its benefit? Yes, the async await syntax in JavaScript makes handling asynchronous code easier and cleaner. Mark a function with async and we can use await inside it to pause until a promise resolved. This lets us to write asynchronous code as it were asynchronous one. It will make simpler and more readable. Now let's move to the different question. What are the JavaScript modules? JavaScript modules are the files that contain code that we can import into the other JavaScript files. This helps us organize our code smaller, manageable piece. We can share variables and functions between the files without cluttering the global scope. So it will make our code more cleaner, more maintainable, and easier to update and easier to reuse. Now let's move to the different question. How do you create and import a module in JavaScript? So to create a JavaScript module, save our code in a file with the .js extension. Use export to make parts of the code available to other files. To use the modules in the different file, use import to bring in the part that we need. So this organizes and shares code efficiently. Now let's move to the different question. What are the benefits of using modules? Using modules in JavaScript helps to keep code organized by breaking into the smaller, manageable parts. This makes our code easier to understand, test, and maintain as well. So modules also present conflict by not polluting the global scope, and it will allow different parts of our application to use the same variable's name without the issue. Now let's move to the different question. Explain prototype inheritance in JavaScript. So prototype inheritance in JavaScript is a way for object to share the properties and method. So each object can have a prototype and object it inherited from. So this means that if you look at the properties on an object and it's not there, so JavaScript check its prototype and it will allow object to use properties from their ancestors. Now let's move to the different question. How does an object inherit properties in JavaScript? So in JavaScript, an object inherits properties through its prototype and template object that comes before it. So when we access a prototype on an object, if the property is not directly on the object, so JavaScript look up to the property on its prototype. So this change can continue through the multiple prototypes as well. Now let's move to the different question. What is the role of prototype chain in inheritance? So the prototype chain in JavaScript is a series of links between the object. So it allows one object to access properties and methods of another object. So when the property is not found on the main objects, JavaScript look up through this chain until it finds the properties or reach the end. Now let's move to the different question. What is the event loop in JavaScript? So the event loop in JavaScript is a system that manages executing code and it will collecting events and processing tasks. So it allows JavaScript to perform tasks like updating the inheritance and handling user interactions while waiting for the other operations, just like fetching data to complete. So this keeps the program responsive even when the busy. Now let's move to the different question. How does the event loop handle functions calls from the call stack and message queue? So the event loops in JavaScript first checks the call stack to see if there are any functions that need to be executed. So if the stack is empty, it look at the message queue. If there are messages waiting, the event loop moves them from one by one onto the call stack executed. So this cycle ensures the JavaScript keeps running smoothly, handling tasks and responding event. Now let's move to the last question, second last question. So now let's move to the different question. Can you explain the term macro task and micro task? So in JavaScript, macro tasks are big jobs like rendering a web page or responding to user input, and micro tasks are smaller jobs that handles quick urgent updates like resolving promises. So the event loop handles all micro tasks before moving on to the next macro task. It will keep updates fast and smooth. Now let's move to the different questions. What are the different ways to declare variables in JavaScript? So in JavaScript, we can declare variables by using var, let, and const. So use var for more flexible variables that can change and exist globally or locally, and use let for variables that change only but within the specific block. Use const for variable that should not change after they are set. Now let's move to the different question. Discuss the scope difference between the var, let, and const. So var has a function scope. It means that it is accessible within the entire functions it is declared in, or the globally if it is not in the functions. And let and const have block scope limited to the block they are declared in, and const variables can't be reassigned after the setting. Now let's move to the different question. What happens if we try to use a variable declared with let or const before its actual declaration? So if we are trying to use a variable declared with let or const before its declaration, so JavaScript will give you an error. This happens because the let and const are in a temporal dead zone from the start of the block until their declaration. So it means that they are not accessible yet. Now let's move to the last questions. What is a temporal dead zone? So the temporal dead zone is a period in JavaScript where the let and const variable exists but cannot be used yet. So it starts from the beginning of the block where the variables are defined and end the variable's declaration, and trying to access the variable during the time causes an error. So thank you.